Now, let's say you're not getting value for money today because we have an extra speaker on the programme now, one of Lord Stoddart's colleagues from long ago, Eric Deakins, who asked to say a few words to us, which I was delighted because I've known about his contribution over the years. He's certainly one of the old brigade in our campaign, fighting against the manipulation of Parliament, which eventually passed the European Communities Act by a majority of only 8 votes. He had 3 attempts at getting a parliamentary seat, including Finchley, where he stood against Mrs. Thatcher in 1959. And he lost one by-election, I know, by 62 votes, when he was opposed by an anti-common market candidate. As it was a by-election, his manifesto was written for him by the party headquarters. If he'd been able to write on his own behalf, it might have been a different result. He was elected for Walthamstow West in 1970, and after boundary changes in 74, the seat was renamed Walthamstow, where he continued until 1987. He was Junior Minister for Trade from 1974 to 76, and for the DHS in 76 to 79. In 1979, he co-wrote a book, You and Your Member of Parliament, with Nance Fyson, and he's conducted researches in political and economic matters. Before entry into Parliament, he was an expert in agricultural marketing with a company called the Fatstock Marketing Corporation. He joined the Anti-Common Market League in 1961 when it was apparent that the Macmillan government wanted to take us into what was then called the common market, and he's been a resolute opponent ever since. Along with Sir Teddy Taylor, Lord Stoddart of Swindon and Nigel Spearing, he was interviewed by CIB on a set of videos which is on our website, which provide a valuable historical record of that account, not just for the independence movement. His recollection of the 1975 referendum points up great similarities with today. There was a fake renegotiation, which was supposed to have ended the project of the euro currency for good, and the in and outsides each had a pamphlet sent to voters, but so did the government. The inside, of course, had vastly more funds than the outside, many of their funds coming from the CIA. So we look forward to Eric's contribution for a few minutes now to give us his exhortation to greater efforts in this battle. Eric, would you like to take to the podium, please?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, one preliminary remark. I am going to read my speech for 2 reasons. Firstly, because I was told I could speak for 10 minutes, and that's very difficult if you're going to be wandering all over the place. You won't make all the points you want. Secondly, because thanks to the efforts of Labour Leave, my speech has been circulated in advance to the press. It'd be very interesting to see what reaction there is. Now, in speaking today, I'm speaking as a member of Labour Leave, a small organisation of mainly Labour MPs and veterans who've been coming together, a meeting to try and get a common attack on the government's position. I shall be making some criticisms today of Labour's leader, the Shadow Chancellor, and the trade unions. I do so as a party member for 60 years, a lifelong socialist, and as the first Labour politician to speak out against the UK joining the common market, as has been mentioned by the chairman at the inaugural meeting of the Anti-Common Market League in March 1961 at Central Hall, Westminster, just about a quarter of a mile from here. I welcomed Jeremy Corbyn's election as Labour leader in the hope that he'd lead our great party in a radically new direction. Before the general election, I assumed that he, like me, his opposition to the EU and its policies was a matter of principle. But now, as leader, he has become an advocate of continued EU membership. This can mean either that he has changed his principles, or that his previous opposition to EU membership was a matter of expediency to sustain a left-wing reputation. Whichever is correct, his actions do not present an inspiring image of his political perception. Last year, Labour's annual conference reaffirmed support for UK membership of the EU, but several suggestions were made for improvements in EU policies affecting the UK. These were made at a time when the Tory renegotiation process on the terms of our membership was getting underway. So Labour supporters must have expected that the leader and the shadow cabinet would take appropriate action. But astonishingly, nothing was done. In parliamentary answers to my colleague Kate Hoey here, both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor Exchequer said they had not received any representations about EU reform from our leader and the Shadow Chancellor. Ignoring Labour's modest reform proposals was a clear dereliction of our leader's responsibility to act in accordance with the party's wishes. This failure is at odds with much of what Jeremy had fought for during his meritorious left-wing work for our party before 2015. I say to Jeremy that your volte-face, or perhaps Damascene conversion, about Britain and the EU muddies Labour's political waters, but it's unlikely to protect you when the right-wing majority in the Parliamentary Labour Party, no doubt delighted and astonished at your change of heart, sets out to undermine you after the referendum. It is doubtful if Labour's traditional supporters, many worried about important EU issues like immigration, will spring to your defence if the Remain campaign wins. Labour's future as a strong opposition is now more dubious than ever before. However, if the result is very close, the issue of EU membership will continue to dominate the political agenda in this country. I now turn briefly to Labour's trade unions. I've been a lifelong member of Unite, the biggest, since I started work after coming out of the army way back. For the past 3 decades, our trade unions have ignored the issue of EU membership because they had been seduced by Delors' vision of a social Europe with greater rights for workers. The EU Commission has been responsible for a few measures, notably equal rights for part-time workers, but most other rights, including maternity and paternity ones, existed in the United Kingdom before any action by the EU Commission. A detailed analysis by the House of Commons Library at the request of Roger Godsiff MP, who was a member of our campaign, shows clearly that the prime responsibility for improving workers' rights in Britain has been the responsibility of the UK government, not of the European Union. The essential fact about workers' rights is that the EU has done nothing that could not have been done by a British government. Of course, in a democracy, governments change, and it's doubtful if some Tory governments would have done much for workers' rights. But that is one of the advantages of democracy. Interest groups cannot always get what they want because public opinion can change governments. However, the trade unions have decided that if Westminster democracy fails on occasion to advance workers' rights, it is acceptable that the EU Commission should do so. In this way, the EU, with the support of British trade unions, is subverting the British democratic process. They should be ashamed of their actions. Their long experience should have taught them that social and economic process comes through national political action, not by the efforts of a power-hungry EU Commission that is unelected and unaccountable for its actions to EU citizens. They should stand up for our democracy by fighting within the UK for the causes they believe in. The Remain campaign assumes that the EU will remain the same because all the arguments relate to the UK leaving the EU as it is now. But several speakers have made this point already. The EU is destined to change fundamentally for the following reasons. First, the Eurozone will have to decide how to reinforce a common monetary policy with a common fiscal policy. This will require close control by the Commission and the central bank over parts of national budgetary policies, thereby further curtailing national sovereignty. Second, without further integration, the Eurozone will gradually weaken as the gap between richer and poorer nations becomes more obvious and more unbearable, requiring the poorest members to make unacceptable sacrifices in social economic living standards to stay in the Eurozone, as is the case with Greece now. The Eurozone is a ramshackle construction cemented with fear. Those who think the UK's future lies in permanent links with such a body need their brains testing. Thank you.